Hello and welcome to our very first video in the series, Creating Your Own Top-Down Space Shooter. In today's video, we will be covering the initial setup and basic movement. As you can see here, all I've done is create a new Unity project and named it Space Shooter. And we will be using Unity 2018-30F2. So let's get started. So today what we're going to be doing is creating our own top-down space shooter. The first step in doing that will be to create the initial setup of the scene so that we have space in the background and it kind of gives it more of a spacey feel before we go into making the more complicated parts. Now, in order to get space in the background, there's a number of ways that we could actually do that. We could create just a plane and then have our camera looking down at it. But the problem with that is that if you moved off the edge, you might get past it and see gray. If there's ever angle changes in the camera, you might also go out of bounds and see the things that you don't want to see. So what we're actually going to do is use what's called a skybox. Skybox, the way it works is it uses multiple images, wraps them all around so that no matter what direction you're looking, you'll always see the same thing and you can travel any distance and never actually reach that image. So it's actually really ideal for what we want to do. Um, what we're going to do to get that set up is actually look on the asset store for some that are already created. It takes a bit of effort to make a wraparound image work properly. So it's actually easier just to find something just for our testing purposes. Ideally, you'll eventually get that created properly, but for now, what we'll do is look for some free assets. And I definitely recommend using free assets if you're just trying to learn basic programming and you don't want to focus too much on the art aspect of it. So um, I've looked here for Nebula and set it to free, and I'm going to try the skybox out here. Yeah, it looks like it is a skybox. It has all the proper images, so I'm going to download that. It looks like it'll work. So the next step will be to import it into the project. Okay, so when you import stuff into your project, it gives you the option to deselect certain folders or files if you know you're not going to need them. But in this case, we're going to try everything, so I'll just leave it as the default and import. Okay, so as you can see, it has created this folder with all the different assets inside of it. There are materials that do have the skybox shader set up and all the materials set already, which is good. That makes it easier for us. But it also is a little bit disorganized here because if we continue to add folders of our own, we can mix packages up with our own things. So what I like to do is create my own folder. You can name it whatever you like. I typically name it just my company name, and then move scenes into it. And then essentially whenever you create your own content, you're going to put it underneath your folder so that the assets and other things can remain in their own. I'm also going to create a scripts folder real quick here while we're here because we're going to need it later. So that's done. So the next thing that we're going to need to do is to actually set it so that we see it in the background. This is actually a skybox what we're looking at, but it's the default one. So to change it, you want to go to Window and then to Rendering, Lighting Settings. And then this lighting tab will open. You can drag it wherever you'd like, but I'm going to put it here for now. And you can see it's set to the default skybox. So what we can do is I'm going to actually set it to game mode for now. And change these out to see what we have available here. So that looks good. Essentially, we're going through and just finding something that will work uh, for a background. That looks pretty good, but I like having a bit of nebula looking stuff in there as well. So I think I'll stick to that, maybe this one. One of the things we can also do is actually go back to the scene and look around, and we can see that there is a number of interesting perspectives here, and it all does blend together even though it's actually a number of different images. They're set up to blend together no matter what direction we look. So actually what I think I'm going to do is set it to this one for now. There is actually ways to do rotations on these. You just have to find the right one that we selected here. So if we go to lighting, we chose DSG. Just going to find that one in here, DSG. And then we can also rotate this on one axis. So I think I'll actually set it to, this looks good. Okay, so now that we've set up the background, so we have some sort of space and it looks a little bit more like we're in a space environment. The next step will be to create the ship itself. To do that, what I'm going to do is just right click here and create an empty object. Call it spaceship. Now, instead of actually importing a 3D asset, what I'm going to do is just create some blocks and put them together to simulate what a ship would look like. So we're going to call this the base, and we're going to set this to 2, 2. And then we'll copy paste this, make this the wing, and I'll make this a bit smaller and rotate it. Actually, it'll be on the y-axis, 90 degrees. And then we'll just pull it back a bit. There we go. So I guess we'll make it about 0.15, the negative. And that will be our basic ship look. When you're doing stuff like game jams or just trying to test and rapid prototype things, it's best just to use blocks and simple primitives. Later on you can import proper objects, but for this we're going to start with just the basics and then kind of build up on it as we go through the tutorials. But that's essentially it. At the moment our camera looks like it's in the wrong place though. It's actually back here. What we want to be doing is looking top down at it, so I'm going to go here and quickly fix that as well. I'm going to set that to 0, put it up about 10 since the y-axis is the up direction. We'll do that on the actual position, not rotation. And we're going to change this to 90 to look down at it. So now, as you can see, we can look down on our ship and start from this point. With the ship created, the next part will be to actually add the logic and scripting to make it so that when we push keys on the keyboard, it'll move the ship around the screen. So before we can get into that, what we actually have to do is add a rigid body component to our spaceship. Right now our spaceship is an empty game object that contains the base and the wings. And they have colliders and visual elements, but they don't actually have anything that tied to the physics system. The reason I created this way is actually because when you have scenes in a hierarchy or objects in a hierarchy like this, when you move the base object, every object underneath moves with it. Had I not put these together, then when you move parts, the other parts would not move with it. So by doing this, I can add one rigid body component to the top. You can do that by or add component just by typing in if you know what you want, or navigating through here. You could do physics and then rigid body, or just type in rigid and then add it. So what this component does is tie it into the Unity physics system. So now what it'll actually do is update when we hit play, and what you'll see is this ship actually fall away from us because it now has gravity affecting it, and it's going to fall forever away. Obviously we don't want that, so one of the other things you can do with the rigid bodies, we can get into more of these components later, but we're going to focus on this one, which is freezing positions. So when I freeze the Y position, it'll stop it from going movements in the Y direction. So you can see here Y is up and down according to our layout, and you can see up here as well which color represents which direction. So what we're doing is freezing the Y direction, saving it, and then hitting play, and what you'll see is that it'll now stay fixed, but other physics things could still push it around, and we can still move it around in the other two directions, which are X and Z, Z being forward, X being left and right. So the next part is to start adding the scripting.